It was supposed to be an event of monumental significance. Humanity had spent decades listening for the faintest whispers from the stars, hoping for a sign that we were not alone in the universe. When the signal came, it was unmistakable. A complex transmission, rich with patterns that no human mind could ever have imagined, broadcast from a distant star system over 500 light-years away. At first, the scientific community was skeptical. A mere mistake, they thought. Maybe it was just another natural radio wave anomaly. But within days, experts from around the world began decoding the message. This was no random signal. It was deliberate. It was intelligent. The world held its breath. Governments made their announcements, while astronomers worked frantically to uncover the identity of the sender. As the signal's origins were pinpointed to a star system in the Andromeda Galaxy, the world's leaders, scientists, and military officials gathered for an unprecedented briefing. The alien message offered an invitation, one that would forever change humanity's place in the cosmos. "We seek knowledge," the message said in a perfectly understandable translation. "Our civilization has witnessed your growth. Come, join us. We offer peace." For a moment, there was unity. The invitation was accepted. A fleet of human ships, sophisticated but still primitive by galactic standards, was readied for a journey like no other. A first contact that would go down in history as the beginning of a new age. Humanity would finally step into the galactic community. But little did they know, the aliens on the other end of the signal, the Zrak, were not prepared for what would come next. The Zrak were an ancient species, one of the oldest in the known galaxy. In their eyes, humans were nothing more than primitive creatures. They had watched from afar, intrigued by the planet's rise from chaos into civilization, but they had little faith in humanity's potential. The Zrak had a long history of interacting with younger species, manipulating them to their advantage. They had seen countless worlds like Earth, civilizations too eager to prove themselves, too hopeful to resist the subtle control of a superior species. Their invitation to Earth was not an act of benevolence. It was a test. A trial to see whether humanity was ready for the kind of power the Zrak controlled. They wanted to see how easily humans could be dominated. But the Zrak did not understand one simple fact about humans: their resilience. As the humans' first ship entered the Zrak system, the Zrak were already planning to use their superior technology to overwhelm the human visitors. They had been studying Earth's military capabilities, and they had concluded that the humans would be no match for their advanced weapons. The humans' ships were small and fragile compared to the massive Zrak warships, but that didn't matter. The Zrak would overwhelm them before they even had a chance to make their demands clear. What the Zrak didn't account for, however, was the singular human quality that had allowed them to survive against all odds, the ability to fight back, adapt, and never give up. As Earth's fleet entered the Zrak system, a quiet tension gripped the bridge of every ship. The commanders knew they were walking into the unknown. They had been briefed on the potential dangers, but the reality was far more terrifying. This was no first contact as they had imagined it, this was a battlefield, and they were the prey. But humanity, with its history of defying the odds, would not be so easily intimidated. The first sign that something was wrong came when a warning beacon blared through the communications channels. The Zrak had launched an unexpected attack, unleashing a barrage of energy beams that tore through the void. The human ships were caught off guard, but their instincts kicked in. The Zrak underestimated the strength and tenacity of Earth's engineers. Captain Mara Jensen, leader of the human fleet, was one of the first to act. With the guidance of her crew, she swiftly navigated the ship into a defensive formation, using evasive maneuvers that the Zrak didn't expect from such primitive vessels. "Activate countermeasures," she barked, as the first wave of energy beams scraped against the hull. Inside the human ships, the crew members knew they were in uncharted territory. But they were determined. This wasn't just about survival, it was about proving that humanity was more than just an experiment, more than a fleeting blip on the galactic radar. Back on Earth, leaders and generals watched in disbelief as the news flooded in. Humanity's response wasn't that of a conquered race, it was a rallying cry. The humans fought back with everything they had, using their ingenuity, their resourcefulness, and their raw determination. The Zrak, for all their arrogance, had made one fatal error: they had underestimated humanity. As the first human ships engaged in battle, the galaxy was about to witness a side of humanity that no one, least of all the Zrak, had ever anticipated. And this was only the beginning. The battle raged on in the cold expanse of space, with the once sleek and seemingly fragile human ships performing maneuvers that defied the expectations of their Zrak adversaries. Captain Mara Jensen's flagship, the Resolute, had already taken heavy damage, but the crew aboard had proven more resilient than anyone could have imagined. The Zrak's initial assault, powerful as it was, had not crushed the human spirit. Instead, it ignited something primal within them. "Enemy fire incoming," shouted Lieutenant Robert Hayes from his console. "We've got multiple shots coming in at 3 o'clock. Brace for impact." Despite the barrage, the Resolute held steady, its shields shimmering as they absorbed the energy blasts. But the ship was not built to withstand this kind of punishment forever. The crew knew they had to act quickly. "Captain," Lieutenant Hayes continued, urgency in his voice, "they're using some kind of energy-dampening technology. Our shields are already down to 60%. If we don't disable their primary weapon systems, we're done for." Mara's knuckles whitened on the command chair's armrests as she scanned the battle unfolding on the holographic display before her. The Zrak fleet was enormous, massive, intimidating ships flanked by smaller craft that swarmed like deadly insects around their prey. But the humans were unpredictable. That was the key to their survival. "Divert all power to weapons," Mara ordered. "We need to hit them fast and hard. Hayes, find a weak point, anything. We're not going down without a fight." As the crew followed her commands with unwavering discipline, the Resolute plunged into the fray, darting between the Zrak ships with precision and agility that even their advanced sensors struggled to keep up with. Human ingenuity, born from years of desperate conflict and adaptation, had created a force that no one could have predicted. On the enemy side, Commander Zalthar of the Zrak fleet watched in disbelief. He had seen countless species rise and fall, but humanity's response was unlike anything he had encountered. Their ships, though technologically inferior, moved with a fluidity that his species' systems couldn't track with ease. The humans' unpredictability was both their strength and their greatest weapon. "What is this?" Zalthar growled, slamming a fist on his console. "How are they doing this? These primitive ships should have been destroyed in moments." His officers scrambled to adjust their targeting systems, but the humans were relentless, striking at vulnerable points with precision that belied their race's supposed inferiority. The Zrak ships, designed for dominance rather than adaptability, were now facing a foe that fought with a raw, unrefined power the Zrak had underestimated. Meanwhile, back on Earth, the world's eyes were glued to the news channels. As the battle in space unfolded, humans were gripped with a mix of fear and hope. News networks broadcast real-time footage of the fight, and for the first time in history, Earth felt united. There was no distinction between countries or political lines. Everyone was watching. Everyone was hoping. And everyone believed in the potential of humanity. In the command centers around the globe, military leaders scrambled to provide support. The Earth Defense Force, EDF, had been preparing for this moment for years, but no one had anticipated an actual war with an alien species. Still, they rallied to the cause, sending reinforcements to the fleet. Their combined efforts began to tip the scales in humanity's favor, as the Zrak found themselves unable to fully counter the ingenuity and tenacity that the humans displayed. Back in the battle, the tide began to turn. The Zrak flagship, Dreadnought of Zorath, loomed ominously ahead. Zalthar's eyes narrowed as he focused all his attention on Mara Jensen's ship. If he could eliminate the humans' flagship, the rest of their fleet would crumble. But he failed to anticipate just how resourceful humans could be when cornered. Mara's voice rang through the comms, "All ships, focus fire on their flagship. If we can take out their command, we can cripple their fleet." A cheer erupted from the crew as the word spread. The Zrak flagship was their target now, and the humans unleashed everything they had. From their limited supply of advanced missiles to their most powerful energy weapons, the humans pressed on, no longer just defending but attacking with a sense of righteous fury. A direct hit from the Resolute's primary cannon blasted through the shields of the dreadnought, creating a massive explosion that rocked the Zrak command vessel. Zalthar screamed in frustration, realizing too late that humanity's will to survive, and their unwillingness to be dominated, was stronger than any alien force he had encountered. His flagship was no longer operational, and with it, the tide of battle began to shift. The Zrak forces, now disoriented and leaderless, faltered. The human fleet pushed forward, capitalizing on the opening. Mara's voice came again, calm and determined, "This is our moment. Finish it." The remaining Zrak ships, now scattered and uncoordinated, tried to regroup but were quickly overwhelmed by human firepower. The Zrak had underestimated humanity's ability to fight back, and now they were paying the price. In the cold void of space, the unthinkable had just occurred. The once mighty Zrak fleet, with its superior technology, was on the verge of defeat, at the hands of a species they had considered unworthy of even acknowledgement. And for humanity, this was only the beginning. Victory, though sweet, was not as simple as it seemed. As the last of the Zrak warships limped away or disintegrated under human fire, the vast silence of space seemed almost oppressive. The human fleet, bloodied but unbroken, had forced the Zrak into a retreat, a stunning and unexpected triumph that would reverberate throughout the galaxy. But Commander Zalthar's defeat was far from the end of the story. Back on their homeworld, deep within the heart of the Zrak Empire, the retreat was seen not as a setback but as a momentary lapse, an anomaly that would soon be corrected. The Zrak leadership convened in secret, furious and humiliated. This primitive species, these so-called humans, had disrupted their centuries of galactic supremacy in a single, catastrophic battle. The Zrak leaders were not accustomed to failure. They had long ruled the galaxy with an iron fist, manipulating and subjugating countless species. The thought that a young and naive species like humanity could thwart their plans was anathema to their understanding of the cosmos. To them, this was no longer about just defeating humans, it was about showing the galaxy that the Zrak were still the dominant force. Zalthar, his pride bruised but his resolve hardened, had one mission now: vengeance. "Send the message," he ordered, his voice cold and filled with venom. "We will show them what happens when they defy the Zrak. They are a nuisance that must be eradicated, and I will see them crushed." The Zrak military machine began to churn with terrifying efficiency. This time, they would not make the same mistake. They would not underestimate humanity again. Meanwhile, humanity's victory was still fresh, but it was also fragile. The leaders of Earth knew that this battle was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. For the first time in history, humanity had stood up to an alien species, and won. But that victory had come at a great cost. Thousands of lives had been lost, and their ships were heavily damaged. The Zrak were not a race to be taken lightly, and the realization of the enemy's vast power loomed over Earth like a dark cloud. Captain Mara Jensen, aboard the Resolute, understood that the Zrak would not let this humiliation go unpunished. They would return, and when they did, they would come with a vengeance. "Admiral Klein," Mara said over the communications channel, her face tight with concern, "we need to prepare for the inevitable retaliation. We might have won this battle, but the war is far from over." Admiral Klein, commander of the Earth Defense Force, replied with a somber tone. "We know, Captain. We've already begun fortifying our defenses. But there's something else. We've received intelligence that the Zrak are gathering a fleet much larger than the one we just fought. This isn't just about retaliation, it's about their pride." The weight of those words hung heavy in the air. Humanity had been forced into a corner by its own victory. The Zrak would not simply accept this defeat, they would come back stronger, faster, and more brutal. In the aftermath of the battle, Earth scientists scrambled to reverse-engineer the alien technology salvaged from the wreckage of the Zrak ships. Every scrap of technology was analyzed, every weapon studied for weaknesses. Humanity had learned much from the battle, but now the question was, could they learn fast enough to stand against the Zrak's full might? Back on the front lines, the human fleet was not sitting idle. Mara and her crew worked tirelessly, repairing and upgrading their ships, refining their tactics, and preparing for the inevitable counterattack. But as the days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Humanity was in a race against time. On the distant reaches of Zrak space, their war council convened once more. Zalthar's anger had only grown since the retreat. The Zrak had begun assembling their most fearsome warships, each one equipped with advanced weaponry designed to obliterate humanity's fragile fleet. The Zrak had one advantage humanity did not: time. Their empire spanned across thousands of star systems, and their industrial capacity was unmatched. The fleet they were building was unlike anything the humans had seen, and it would be powered by the full fury of the Zrak's technological supremacy. Humanity's victory was not a fluke, but it had come at a great cost, and the Zrak were preparing to make sure the next battle would be the humans' last. As Earth prepared for the looming storm, it became clear that their survival was far from guaranteed. But despite the overwhelming odds, humanity's defiance burned brighter than ever. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had overcome them. But this time, they would have to face a force that was more determined and better equipped than anything they had ever encountered. And in the heart of it all was Mara Jensen, who refused to believe that humanity's victory was a one-time fluke. "We fight because we must," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "But we fight with the knowledge that we will not back down. We will never back down." The stage was set for the next chapter of this galactic war. And the Zrak were about to learn just how dangerous a cornered human could be. The darkness of space felt colder than ever before as the countdown began. Humanity's victory over the Zrak was not only a political shock, it was a challenge to the very foundation of the Zrak Empire's superiority. The day was coming when the Zrak would strike back with a force that Earth's fleet would be hard-pressed to withstand. Captain Mara Jensen stood on the bridge of the Resolute, staring out into the endless void, deep in thought. In the last few weeks, humanity had pushed forward with repairs, salvaged Zrak technology, and begun to organize a defense. But in her gut, she knew the fight ahead would be unlike any they had faced before. "We've received confirmation," came the voice of Lieutenant Robert Hayes, his voice grim as he walked into the command center. "The Zrak have assembled a new fleet. They've been silent for weeks, but we've just intercepted their communications. Their forces are ready, Captain." Mara nodded, her fingers tightly gripping the edge of her command chair. "What are we looking at?" 10 times the size of their original fleet, Hayes said, his eyes fixed on the data screen. "Larger warships, heavier weaponry, and more advanced shields. But there's something else. They're deploying something we've never seen before, an energy weapon that's beyond anything we've been able to analyze." The hairs on the back of Mara's neck stood up. The Zrak had always had a technological edge. But something about this new weapon, the unknown factor, gave her a chill. "Can we stop it?" she asked. Hayes paused, considering the question carefully. "We don't know. We've seen traces of its energy signature, but it's unlike anything in our databases. If it works the way their communication suggests, it could wipe out entire fleets with one shot." A tense silence hung in the air. The Zrak were not merely retaliating, they were preparing to annihilate humanity. The strength they had displayed before was nothing compared to what was coming. "We don't have the luxury of waiting to find out what it does," Mara said, her voice resolute. "We need to strike first, disrupt their preparations, and make sure we don't give them a chance to use that weapon." As the crew scrambled to prepare for the inevitable, humanity's allies, other species who had long watched Earth's rise, began to rally to their cause. The Zrak's reputation for ruthlessness was well known across the galaxy, and Earth's unexpected victory had sparked hope in those who had long suffered under Zrak rule. They would stand with humanity now, their combined forces ready to help in the face of extinction. But even with the combined might of several species, Mara knew the odds were still stacked against them. Their ships were smaller, slower, and less technologically advanced compared to the Zrak's new war machine. Every battle had already come with heavy losses. And the Zrak's mysterious weapon could change everything. As the human fleet gathered in formation, preparing for what would be their final confrontation, a sudden wave of dread washed over Mara. She had led her crew through countless challenges, but this was something different. The Zrak were preparing to unleash something far darker than anything humanity had yet faced. The Resolute joined the armada of Earth's fleet and their allies, heading toward the heart of the Zrak Empire, where the final battle would be fought. Every ship in the formation knew that survival wasn't guaranteed, but the one thing they could control was their resolve. They fought because they had no other choice. On the Zrak flagship, the Eternal Tyrant, Zalthar stood at the helm, his rage now channeled into a singular focus. His humiliation had driven him to madness. It was no longer about conquering Earth, it was about vengeance. And for that, the Zrak had developed a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. This will be their end, Zalthar muttered to himself, watching as his officers prepared the weapon. The weapon was an ancient Zrak creation, one that had been abandoned and forgotten for centuries. It was known only as the Nullifier, a device capable of erasing entire fleets from existence by unraveling the very fabric of spacetime. The Zrak had never used it before, fearing its unpredictable consequences. But now, with humanity standing at the threshold of victory, there would be no hesitation. The weapon would be deployed, and humanity would be wiped from the stars. As the Zrak fleet moved into position, the human fleet surged forward to meet them, crossing the vast distance between the two forces at breakneck speed. The distance closed, but the tension grew thicker. The human ships, now battle-hardened and prepared, lined up in tight formations, their weapons ready. The Zrak, with their overwhelming superiority, prepared to unleash destruction on an unimaginable scale. "Steady, everyone," Mara called to her crew, her voice a calm contrast to the storm brewing around them. "This is it. We fight not just for survival but for everything humanity stands for. We fight for our future." The human fleet moved forward, weapons primed, shields activated, ready to face the Zrak's terrifying new weapon. Yet, none of them could anticipate the true scale of the battle that awaited them. For what lay ahead was not just the fight of their lives, it was the fight for the very existence of their species. In the final seconds before the clash, the Zrak unleashed the Nullifier. The universe seemed to hold its breath as a pulse of energy spread out across space, distorting reality itself. The human fleet braced for impact, but the effects were even more catastrophic than anyone could have imagined. The energy pulse was unlike anything Earth's scientists had predicted. Ships began to flicker, their hulls distorting and bending as if reality itself was coming undone. And then, just as hope seemed to flicker out, a single human ship, the Resolute fired a countermeasure. The energy released from the human ships was a makeshift response, a combination of Zrak technology and human innovation. It was the last chance. Would it work? Would the Nullifier be stopped before it could unravel the human fleet? The answer would come in an instant, as the pulse collided with the combined human forces. The outcome would determine the fate of humanity, and the future of the galaxy. Time seemed to stretch and distort as the Nullifier's pulse surged toward the human fleet, rippling through space like an unstoppable force. For a moment, it felt as though the universe itself had paused, holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. The first wave of the pulse hit the Resolute, Mara Jensen's ship at the heart of the human armada. A shudder ran through the vessel, and the lights flickered violently. Crew members were thrown off balance, alarms blared, and a deep rumbling echoed throughout the hull. "Captain!" Lieutenant Hayes shouted, gripping the edge of his console. "The energy is warping spacetime. The ship's integrity is..." A jolt of violent energy surged through the Resolute, rattling the ship to its core. It felt as though the fabric of reality itself was coming undone. The ship's shields flared and sputtered, straining to hold against the energy pulse. "We're holding together," Mara replied, her voice low but steady. "For now." But the rest of the human fleet wasn't so lucky. The Zrak's Nullifier weapon was tearing through their formations, unraveling the very space around them. Ships flickered and bent in impossible angles, some simply vanishing as though they had never existed. One by one, the human ships that tried to intercept the pulse were either obliterated or thrown off course, becoming shadows of their former selves, caught in the fabric of space itself. The human fleet was on the brink of collapse. But amidst the chaos, a spark of hope flickered. "We've got one shot," said Commander Nathaniel Cole, the chief strategist of the Earth Defense Force, over the comms. "The countermeasure we've been working on, it's now or never." Mara's eyes narrowed in concentration. "Do it. We have to stop this." The countermeasure was humanity's last hope, an improvised combination of Zrak technology and their own experimental devices. Using a fragment of the Zrak's own nullifier energy signature, Earth's engineers had crafted a makeshift weapon, a destabilizing pulse capable of interacting with the nullifier's energy and neutralizing it. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance to reverse the tide of destruction. "All ships, focus fire on the Resolute," came Mara's command. "We need to create a distraction. Keep the Zrak distracted while we deploy the countermeasure." In the moments before the battle took a final, decisive turn, the remaining ships of the human fleet launched a coordinated assault on the Zrak warships. They knew they couldn't win in a traditional fight. But they could create enough chaos to give the Resolute time to activate the countermeasure. The human ships flew in and out of the Zrak formations, engaging in hit-and-run tactics that the Zrak were not prepared for. Their fleet was built for total destruction, not counterinsurgency. The humans' unpredictability worked to their advantage. Even as the Zrak ships continued to fire on their enemies, they could not keep up with the guerrilla tactics of the human fleet. Meanwhile, inside the Resolute, Lieutenant Hayes, his hands flying across the console, initiated the countdown for the countermeasure. Firing in 3, 2, 1. A beam of energy shot from the Resolute, streaking through the void like a pulse of light. It connected with the core of the nullifier pulse. At first, there was silence. Then, the universe seemed to scream as the two energies collided. The nullifier's pulse buckled, its distortion of spacetime fighting against the countermeasure, but it was no match. The fabric of reality began to stabilize as the energies clashed and dissipated, neutralized by the human-created beam. "Status report." Mara barked, her voice strained. "We did it," Hayes replied, his eyes wide with disbelief. "The pulse is neutralized. The nullifier is offline." A wave of relief swept through the bridge of the Resolute, but it was fleeting. The Zrak were far from finished, and their response was swift. Zalthar, standing in the heart of his flagship, had watched the energy beam disperse the nullifier's pulse. He knew this would happen, he had anticipated humanity's ingenuity. But what he hadn't expected was how quickly they would act. "I will not let this humiliation stand," Zalthar hissed, slamming his fist onto the console. "Prepare to launch the second wave." His officers scrambled, preparing to release a fleet of smaller Zrak vessels, elite shock troops designed for rapid strikes. These ships were not about brute force, they were equipped with the most advanced cloaking technology in the Zrak arsenal, and their primary objective was not to fight, they were sent to infiltrate and destroy. Meanwhile, the Resolute and the human fleet had no time to revel in their victory. The Zrak's retaliation was already underway. "Captain," Lieutenant Hayes called, his voice urgent, "they're launching boarding craft. The Zrak are sending infiltrators aboard." A chill ran down Mara's spine. She had always expected the Zrak to be ruthless, but this new level of aggression took things to another level. "They're not just fighting us, they're trying to take our ships from the inside," Mara muttered. "We need to prepare for boarding action," Commander Cole said, his voice steady. "We can't let them breach our hulls. We can't let them win on this front." As Mara quickly ordered her crew to prepare for combat aboard the ship, she knew they were facing a two-front war. The battle in space was one thing, but now the human fleet was being attacked from within. If the Zrak could infiltrate and take down humanity's ships, the battle would be lost, no matter how many enemy ships were destroyed. The sound of heavy boots echoed in the hallways of the Resolute as security teams scrambled to secure key locations. Tensions were at an all-time high. The crew knew that their lives depended not only on their ability to fight in space but also on their ability to repel invaders within their very own ship. And as the Zrak forces closed in on the Resolute, Mara's resolve hardened once more. "We fight until our last breath," she said, turning to face her crew. "We will not let them take what's ours." The human spirit had already proven its strength in the vacuum of space. But now, it would have to prove its resilience on the ground. The war was about to take an even darker turn. And humanity's greatest trial was still ahead. The human fleet had rallied, their victory over the nullifier pulse a temporary respite from the wrath of the Zrak. But even as the space battle raged outside, a far more insidious threat was now closing in on the Resolute. The Zrak's elite infiltrators had boarded their ships. The warning klaxon blared throughout the corridors of the ship, sending crew members into action. The sound echoed through the vast halls, a chilling reminder that the Zrak weren't just here to fight, they had infiltrators, saboteurs, and killers among them, moving unseen and undetected. Mara Jensen paced back and forth on the bridge, her mind racing with thoughts of the battle ahead. She knew that the Resolute had been designed to withstand attacks from external forces, but this? This was something else. "They've breached the lower levels," Lieutenant Hayes reported, his voice tight. "We've lost communication with engineering and the reactor room. We've already had reports of," he cut off, looking visibly unsettled. "What?" Mara demanded, her voice sharp. "Boarding parties," Hayes continued, his eyes wide. "They've deployed cloaking technology, Captain. We can't detect them. We're not just fighting outside, we're fighting from within." A chill settled over the room as the implications of his words sank in. The Zrak had always relied on overwhelming force, but now they were using tactics that played to their strengths: stealth, deception, and sabotage. The human fleet was vulnerable from within. "We need to retake control of the ship," Mara said, her voice steely with resolve. "Seal off all sections. Deploy security teams to all vulnerable areas. Lieutenant Hayes, start organizing teams to sweep the lower decks." The crew nodded, but their faces reflected the gravity of the situation. No longer were they just fighting for survival in space, they were now in a fight for control of their own vessel. Meanwhile, on the lower decks of the Resolute, the Zrak infiltrators were already making their move. They had breached the ship's security and were cutting through its systems with terrifying efficiency. These were not just foot soldiers, they were the best the Zrak had to offer, trained for silent, deadly operations. Their weapons were silent, their movements swift and calculated. In the dark corridors, their cloaked forms drifted like shadows, moving undetected. They had a singular goal: to destroy the ship from within, to sabotage its vital systems and make it an easy target for the rest of the Zrak fleet. Ensign Layla Anders, part of the security team assigned to sweep the lower decks, was one of the first to encounter the Zrak infiltrators. She was stationed near the engine room when a flicker in the air made her pulse quicken. Her instincts screamed at her, but there was nothing visible, no one in sight. Suddenly, one of the Zrak soldiers dropped from the shadows, silent and quick. His cloaking device shimmered as it failed to compensate for the movement, and Layla barely had time to react. A swift strike from the Zrak's blade drew a streak of red across her suit as she narrowly avoided being impaled. In that split second, she fired her sidearm. The shot rang out, and the Zrak warrior fell to the ground. But this wasn't a victory, it was a warning. More Zrak appeared, moving through the darkness, their cloaks blending with the shadows, their steps swift and decisive. "Back up!" Layla yelled into her comms, but the signal was already being jammed. She could hear more of them, closing in. The Zrak had overwhelmed the lower decks, and the ship's security teams were struggling to get a foothold. Back on the bridge, Mara's attention was divided between the fight outside and the reports from within. The alarms were sounding in all sections as the Zrak infiltrators made their presence known. "They're everywhere, Captain," Commander Cole reported, his voice grim. "We've lost contact with 2 of our primary security teams. We need to send more reinforcements." "We can't afford to thin our forces," Mara replied. "We need to be surgical." We need to retake control of critical systems. If we lose the reactor or the command center, we're done. She turned to Lieutenant Hayes, her eyes narrowing. Prepare a team for the reactor room. We need to isolate the infiltrators there before they cause any permanent damage. And we need the engineering deck secured. Get me a secure link with the fleet. We have to hold them off long enough for reinforcements to arrive. As the human forces scrambled to regain control of the Resolute, the Zrak were pushing forward, relentless in their mission. They had a singular goal: destroy the ship. Mara's hand clenched into a fist as she looked at the tactical readouts. She could see the damage the Zrak had already inflicted. Their sabotage was beginning to cripple key systems. The ship's power was flickering, and life support systems were failing in some sections. If they didn't act fast, the ship could be lost entirely. But the humans weren't about to give up. The crew of the Resolute knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and under siege, but they had something the Zrak did not: the will to survive. On the lower decks, Layla and her remaining security team managed to regroup, finding an area of the ship that was still operational. They didn't have much time before the Zrak would strike again, but they had an advantage: an intimate knowledge of the ship's layout. We need to flush them out, Layla said, her voice strained but determined. We'll force them into a corner. With makeshift weapons in hand, the humans prepared to retake the ship, fighting back against the relentless Zrak forces that had infiltrated their ranks. The battle was no longer just one of external warfare, it was a struggle for survival within the very heart of their vessel. And as the crew of the Resolute moved forward, inch by inch, with fire in their hearts and the survival of their species at stake, they knew that this fight wasn't just about saving a ship. It was about showing the Zrak that humanity would never kneel, no matter the cost. Outside the ship, the battle in space raged on. The human fleet, though diminished, still fought fiercely. But inside the Resolute, it was a siege unlike any other, one that would test the crew's resilience to the breaking point. And in the shadows of the ship, the Zrak waited, knowing that they were on the verge of something far greater than a simple military victory. They were on the verge of something that would reshape the galaxy forever. But the humans had one thing the Zrak could not understand: the power to defy fate. The battle within the Resolute had become a war of attrition. Zrak infiltrators continued to cut through the ship's vital systems with brutal efficiency, but the human crew fought with every ounce of their strength to hold them off. As the clock ticked down, the fate of humanity rested not just on the outcome of the battle in space, but on their ability to reclaim control of their ship. Captain Mara Jensen stood before the command console, sweat beading on her brow. The external sensors showed that the Zrak fleet was in disarray, their ships being picked off by the surviving human forces. But those were just numbers. Inside the Resolute, the struggle was far more personal. Engineering team reports they're almost through the Zrak barricades, Lieutenant Hayes said, his voice a strained mix of hope and exhaustion. We'll have the power back online in a few minutes. Mara nodded, but her mind was on the reactor room. If the Zrak managed to sabotage the core, there would be no escape. We don't have that long, she muttered. We need to move now. She turned to Commander Cole, who was coordinating the retake of the lower decks. His expression was grave. We've got them cornered, but there are more Zrak infiltrators in the reactor room. We can't risk them disabling the core. Mara clenched her fists. This was their last chance. If they could secure the reactor room and stop the Zrak from further sabotage, the Resolute could become operational again, and humanity's fleet could fight with renewed strength. We move now, Mara commanded, her voice like steel. Deploy security teams to the reactor room. Everyone else, hold the line. We can't afford to lose any more ground. The crew sprang into action. The last pockets of resistance were being crushed, but the Zrak were fierce and relentless, and their numbers had thinned only slightly. The human fighters, though weary and bloodied, had no intention of letting the ship fall. Mara led the charge to the reactor room herself. The corridor was eerily quiet, save for the distant sounds of combat and the hum of the failing systems. It was a race against time. They were close, so close, but there was still a chance the Zrak had placed explosives or other traps to ensure the ship's destruction if they failed. The moment Mara and her team arrived at the reactor room, they encountered the final line of Zrak soldiers. Unlike the others, these soldiers were heavily armored, equipped with energy shields and plasma rifles, clearly designed to hold this critical location at any cost. The door to the reactor room was locked, and the Zrak were defending it with everything they had. "Get the door open," Mara ordered. "We need to take them down before they activate the failsafe." Security personnel and engineers worked in unison, fighting to break through the blast doors. Meanwhile, Mara and Cole's teams laid down suppressing fire to keep the Zrak from advancing. The fight was brutal and intense, but the humans were determined. Suddenly, the door gave way with a resounding crack, and a flash of blue energy burst from the Zrak soldiers' rifles. The humans stormed in, guns blazing, and the two sides collided in a violent melee. Mara's heart pounded as she fought her way through the chaos, her combat suit absorbing the worst of the impact as she pushed forward. In the thick of it, the Zrak commander, a hulking figure covered in black armor, came into view. He moved like a phantom, striking down human soldiers with terrifying precision. His energy blade flashed in the dim light of the reactor room, and in one swift motion, he knocked one of the security team to the ground. Mara's eyes locked onto the commander. She couldn't let him destroy the reactor. She couldn't let him end this fight for good. She lunged forward, using the chaos of the battle to her advantage. The commander's attention shifted for just a moment, and that was enough for Mara. With a swift, well-placed strike, she knocked his weapon aside and tackled him to the ground. He roared in fury, throwing her off, but she recovered quickly and delivered a punch to his throat, followed by a kick to his chest. His armor cracked under the impact, and he staggered back. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The Zrak commander raised his blade, his eyes filled with rage. But before he could strike, Mara lunged once more, disarming him with a quick swipe. The fight was over. "Reactors clear," Lieutenant Hayes shouted from the control panel. "Power's coming back online. Systems are stabilizing." Mara stood over the defeated Zrak commander, her breath heavy and her body aching from the fierce battle. She had seen many fights in her time, but this was different. It was personal. It was about survival. And they had won. Outside, the space battle had reached its crescendo. The Zrak fleet, deprived of its most advanced ships and leadership, was faltering. The combined strength of Earth's fleet and their allies proved to be too much. The Zrak, now scattered and disorganized, began to retreat. Their once mighty warships, defeated and vulnerable, were being picked off one by one. The Zrak flagship, the Eternal Tyrant, took heavy fire, its shields failing and its weapon systems offline. Zalthar, desperate, could only watch as his fleet crumbled. The human spirit had proven far stronger than his expectations. In the final moments of the battle, as the Zrak forces retreated into the darkness of space, Mara turned to face the bridge crew of the Resolute. They had won. Against all odds, humanity had proven itself. "We did it," Commander Cole said, his voice filled with relief. "We beat them." Mara nodded, her gaze hardening as she stared out the viewport at the remains of the Zrak fleet. "We've shown them what we're capable of. And we'll show them again if they think they can come back." The human fleet had won the day, but the war was far from over. This battle had proven that humanity could stand against any force in the galaxy and emerge victorious. And as the crew of the Resolute watched the stars beyond them, they knew this was just the beginning of humanity's place among the stars. The galaxy would remember today as the day humanity proved that they would never be underestimated again. Humanity had won, but their story was far from finished.